Hello to you all, liverymen, freemen, cab guide students and guests. This is being filmed on April the 20th, 2020. Hopefully slap bang in the middle of the isolation for the coronavirus. This is my second video, part 2 of my presentations on Banqueting House. And I left off with Henry VIII coming towards the end of his life. He has married his sixth wife, Catherine Parr, who some of you reminded me I'd forgotten the name of in the last video. Catherine Parr was married to Henry in 1544 and was, as I say, pretty much his nursemaid for the last 3 years of his life. Henry died at the age of 55 in 1547. His monarchy has passed on to his son, the son that he'd always wanted, born from Jane Seymour. His name was Edward VI. Edward was always quite a sickly child, and so it was no surprise that at the age of 15, Edward also passed away. In some ways, making the whole mess of the early part of Henry's life, and possibly even the dissolution of the monasteries, a waste of time. However, that was how things moved on. The monarchy then passes to Edward's eldest sister, Mary I, who was the daughter of Catherine of Aragon. Mary had never really renounced her Catholicism. It was a mark of respect to her mother, or homage to her mother, that she had retained her Catholic beliefs. Homage and respect because on the when Henry divorces Catherine, not only does he send her into isolation, ironically, but also he bans her from seeing her own daughter Mary for the last 3 years of her life. So Mary has a lot of is quite antagonistic towards her father and brings back Catholicism, reintroduces Catholicism to the country. Unlike her father, she doesn't have to execute anywhere near as many people. He executed around 35,000. Mary executes around 290 Protestants who refuse to convert back to Catholicism. This is how life goes on during Mary's reign until she dies in 1558. And then the monarchy is then passed on to her sister, the next sibling, who is Elizabeth I, who is a daughter of Anne Boleyn. Elizabeth, one of the most successful monarchs in this country's history, and one of the longest serving. She reigns from 1558 until 1603. Famously, and probably celebrated the fact that Elizabeth had no children, and so the country is now left yet again without a monarch, a member of the Tudor family to pass the monarchy on to. Some people, some tourists have questioned the fact that we didn't then look around for a cousin, a relative, a nobleman, a brave warrior to take over the monarchy of the country. But such is the way of royalty that the monarchy has to pass to royal blood, close royal blood. And so rather than pick an Englishman, we search for the nearest relative to the Tudors. And so we go to Scotland and approach James VI of Scotland and ask him to become the King of Scotland and England in an act of unification, of which, of course, he accepts. So in 1603, James I becomes King of England, James I of England and Scotland. Now, James believes in the divine right of kings. Put simply, it means that only God and the monarch are important. Wherever they say goes. and this isn't the best situation for democracy. Parliament is having its nose put out of joint quite regularly by James because of his belief that he's God's chosen one on earth, and so therefore what he says goes. However, in terms of Banqueting House, James has the banqueting building of Henry VIII's palace rebuilt by a man called Robert Stickell. Just checking my notes there. Robert Stickell. He didn't like the building. He really did dislike this building, and was quite pleased when in 1619 this second Banqueting House burnt down. And then he employed quite a famous architect, Inigo Jones, to rebuild his new palace, which he did in a style which was much more similar in style to the previous palace that Elizabeth I had renovated, her father's palace. And James was very pleased with the result. He employed the Renaissance artist Rubens to paint some ceiling pieces for the palace, which Rubens did, but didn't actually finish or put in place until long after James had passed away. So Rubens put his ceiling pieces in place in 1636. James died in 1625. So what we have with these ceiling pieces, which you can still see today and are a major draw to people visiting the Banqueting House, are depictions of God and James. Again, this divine right of kings. And it's very much a depiction of God and James being best friends and ruling the world, unifying Scotland and England, and healing the sick, which dispelling people of the king's evil, which was became a custom in James's reign to bring lepers and people suffering from different diseases for the king to place his hand upon them and hopefully cure them. But James's negative points mainly are James's divine right of kings, his disregard for Parliament, and his love of Renaissance artists. This carries on to his son, Charles I, who takes over the monarchy from James when he dies. And James is even more so, even more in this way, very flowery, enjoys his art, enjoys his fine clothes, doesn't have much regard for Parliament, sees Parliament as being somewhere that is basically there just to provide wealth for the king by raising taxes and providing him with money to go and buy paintings. Nice life. And added to this, just to add another little peak on of problems to Charles's reign, Charles has a love of Italian art and Italian clothing. Now this is the beginning of the doubts that the Parliament has and the people have, and especially the staunch Protestants who are very proud of the fact that Henry VIII has dispelled the Catholic Church, and then his daughter after him, Elizabeth I, who, after Mary died, takes the country back into the national church, into Protestantism, the Church of England. Charles is everything that they feel is wrong with monarchy. He has dissolved Parliament in 1633, and he has very close links with Italy. He doesn't have a problem with Europeans or Rome. Now this is where the Pope lives, Rome. And in their mind, Charles may very well be deciding that the country needs to go back to following the Catholic Church. And so during that period of time from 1633 until 1642, the parliamentarians start to build up a force. They build up people that are wary and angry at the king. Firstly, by dissolving parliament, the people don't have a say anymore. The king rules, and there is no form of democracy. Democracy wasn't that great during the 17th century, but at least there was some sort of say and some sort of voting system within Westminster Hall that meant that the country was run under rules that we would recognise today. And so by 1642, the parliamentarians have gathered an army and they go to war with the King of England. And so the English Civil War starts. It's a long drawn out war. Different sections of the country follow different sides, and different people, different levels of society follow different sides. There is no hard and fast reason for why one nobleman will follow the parliamentarians and another will follow the royalists. As far as we are concerned, as Londoners, London backs the parliamentarians, and so the king is banished from his palace, his Whitehall Palace, and spends most of his time in Oxford, decamps to Christ Church College in Oxford. 1648, we are coming towards the end of the Civil War, and the parliamentarians have the upper hand. Charles is captured and is placed on trial for treason against the country. Now this is this is uncharted territory. We are now going to put the king on trial, which means we will very likely become a republic. Excuse me. So it's a project. It's a project that has been unseen before. A scary project. The leader of the parliamentarians, Oliver Cromwell, approaches High Court judges and other members of Parliament and asks them to sit in trial over the king during his trial for treason. And initially, everybody he asks refuses because they don't like the idea of this, being the person given the job of sentencing the king to death, because invariably the sentence will be death. So Cromwell has to handpick 59 parliamentarians and judges, and he tells them, you will sit in judgment at the king's trial at Westminster Hall. And if you decide that you will not turn up, then we will place your portrait upon your chair, and everybody will see your face and will swear that you were there that day. So you will be attending the king's trial. So the trial goes ahead. It goes on for 3 days, and the king is found guilty. He is sentenced to be decapitated on the 30th of January 1649. On that morning, 11 o'clock, the king is marched across from where he's being held at St James's Palace. He is wearing a number of layers of clothes in order to ensure that he doesn't shiver, because he doesn't want to look as though he is scared in the eyes of his subjects. The fact that he had run and had to be captured 2 or 3 times tells you that he was obviously very afraid of having an axe separating his head from his body. He is marched to Banqueting House, and where a scaffold has been built from a window which doesn't exist anymore. Most people will, and whenever I take tours, it's always good to take people to the central window on Whitehall. It's symmetrically pleasing, and it makes perfect sense to pitch the centre window. But actually, and then from a number of sources, and the last one I read was Charles Spencer's book on called The Killers of the King. The actual window where the scaffold was built from was more likely to be in Horse Guards Road. And so the king was brought out onto the scaffold, but the executioner has not turned up because he also is rather afraid of being the man responsible for killing the king. It is said that he got rather drunk the night before and doesn't arrive until 2 o'clock. And at 2 o'clock, or around 10 past 2, Charles I's execution takes place in front of a large crowd who are not cheering and clapping and showing the normal jubilant signs that a crowd did in those days when it came to execution day. That they have fun and excitement for all the family. There is a gasp because we are now a republic. And so for the next 9 years, the country is run by Oliver Cromwell, head of the Parliamentarians, who is the Lord High Protector of the Commonwealth. And as I said, him and his parliamentarians are staunch Puritans. They are extreme Protestants. As such, they don't like anything that is deemed Catholic. Colourful clothes, stained glass windows, exuberant celebration of holy days such as Christmas. Christmas is all but banned, and they are not a very happy bunch. They're not a very enjoyable bunch of people to be around. Drinking is frowned upon. And so when Oliver Cromwell dies of natural causes in 1658, and the job of running the country passes to his son Richard. Richard is not very good at the job. He's not a born leader like his father, and so the royalist PR machine gets going. The royalists have never disappeared. Charles's son has been living in exile on the continent, and word goes around, we could get the king again. We could have a monarchy again. We could go back to those happy days where you could drink in the streets, you could wear colourful clothes, you could celebrate Christmas. You can imagine the sort of ideas that the royalists were whipping up in people's minds. And so within 2 years, in 1660, it's agreed. Parliamentarians are mostly overthrown, and those that do decide to remain have changed loyalty and believe that bringing back the monarchy, restoration, is a good idea. And so 1660, Charles II takes the throne of England, and we are once more a monarchy. One of the first jobs of Charles II is to look for those 59 men that sat in judgment over his father at the trial. He manages to find 9 of them. Some have died, some have managed to run as far away as they can not to be captured again, and the king sends plenty of spies out over to the New World, over in Massachusetts, and across Europe into Holland, as far away as Switzerland. And he did manage to recover a number of those men. One was pardoned, but 9 were brought for trial for regicide, for the death of the king. They were all found guilty, held in the Tower of London, and then on the day of their execution they would have been taken, dragged by horse, depending on the relationship that they've had with their jailer. They would have been dragged on a wattle cart, or not. They may have been dragged by their feet. They'd have been taken to the area that we now know as Trafalgar Square, to the site where you will find the statue of Charles I now, Charles I Island we know it as. and then they would have been picked up and their heads placed in a noose. They would have been slowly allowed to drop, very slowly allowed to drop, until they were strangled. If you drop somebody too fast when they have a noose around their neck, it's likely to break their neck, and then the fun's over. They are strangled until almost dead, but while they are strangling, they are held by the feet and made to look down Whitehall and to stare at Banqueting House, because that is the site of where they executed the king. When they are almost dead, they are taken down from the noose, placed on a slab, and sliced open. Their genitals are very likely removed and placed in their mouth, and then thrown onto a fire. And after they are sliced open, their intestines are removed and shown to them. And if they are still alive, then their heart is removed and thrown onto a fire. After they have died, they are quartered, cut into 4 quarters, and their head is removed. The head would have been placed on a spike at Westminster Hall, again because these are parliamentarians, and the 4 quarters of their body are nailed to different gates around the City of London, because Londoners backed the parliamentarians. And this is a warning to Londoners: you backed the wrong man. Now, this period wasn't a complete waste of time, because the powers that Parliament has today, many of the powers that Parliament hold today, were gained from that period of time. And especially the pomp and circumstance, the ceremony that we see on the day of the state opening of Parliament, is based mainly around the events of that period, the parliamentary rule. The Queen can never enter Parliament. She is banned from entering Parliament, because obviously the last time that a monarch entered Parliament, it would have been Charles I, in order to dissolve Parliament. So for this reason, still controversially to the royals, a statue of Oliver Cromwell sits on Cromwell Green, directly outside Parliament Hall, as a reminder of the importance of that period and of that man. He is much hated. His body was exhumed. As I said earlier, he died in 1558. His body was exhumed and he was beheaded. His body was thrown into an unknown grave and never to be found again. And his head was placed on a spike in Westminster Hall, just like the other 9 conspirators, or I beg your pardon, it was a conspiracy. These 9 other parliamentarians, where it sat for decades. Banqueting House was used by Charles II for lavish parties. He enjoyed the building. Again, it was a place where he could remember his father, especially looking up on the ceiling and seeing the paintings that Rubens had produced for him. In 1698, sadly, there was a fire started by a housemaid who was drying some sheets. The fire spread throughout Banqueting House, throughout the Whitehall Palace. It was only through direct instruction from William III, who was king at the time, that the Banqueting House we know now was saved. A 15-hour-long fire gave the king's men enough time to brick up the windows of the Banqueting House and therefore save it, stopping the fire from entering inside and gutting the building. It was a slightly different building we know today. It has been renovated, but the interior is very similar to the one that we would have seen during the 17th century. Renovations made in 1774, and then later again in 1829 by John Soane, changed the face, the outside of the building, covered it in Portland stone, which is the building we know today. So that's me on Banqueting House. No doubt I will be doing another video soon, but I hope you're all well and safe, and go and visit Banqueting House. It's one of the only attractions that I know that has beanbags all over the floor, because the main reason people enter the house is that they lie on their backs and stare at Rubens' paintings of James I and the King as best mates. Sorry, James I and God as best friends. See you soon. Bye bye.